Welcome to Module 3, Introduction to Functions. So, why should we use functions? What are functions? What good are functions? Well, functions are used to break up code into smaller units of work. So, for example, if you are trying to solve a problem and there are certain things that you want to do over and over again, if you break up your code into these units of work, you can just reuse these functions and call them and break it up and focus on one thing at a time. Okay, it's called a top-down design, which is a method in which you break up your problem into smaller sub-problems. And then you focus on each sub-problem, and as you focus on each sub-problem, then you can put them back together to solve a larger problem. So what is a function? Well, a function is a block of code, and it's made up of a bunch of statements that perform a particular task. The biggest function in all C programs is the main function, and we've already been using a main function, but we are going to learn how to create user-defined functions, and that's what we're leading into. So far we have used one function definition in our code for this semester, and that one function definition that we've used is called the main function. So let's just go here and I can write that for you. So we have written so far a main function definition. And if you think about it, when you write your main function, you make a block of code. You put int main with an opening curly brace, and then there's content inside of it, and then a closing curly brace. We've also been making function calls to a couple of library functions so far, and the library functions that we've called so far are printf and scanf. Now printf and scanf are part of the standard input-output library, and we make function calls to them, and you make function calls to them over and over and over again. Think about it, if your code, every time you wanted to print something to the screen, say it was 50 lines of code, instead of making one function called a printf, you would have to put all these lines of code in your program in order to print something onto the screen. So it's very nice to be able to reuse these functions over and over again for different types of activities. Function prototypes, we will get to that in just a moment. So when we're starting to make our function for our user-defined functions, we need to learn these three terms: function call, function definition, and function prototype. Now these terms are used for this class for your user-defined functions. So the first thing is a function call. A function call is a statement. That means that the function call is going to end in a semicolon. So again, an example of a function call is when you go printf An example of a function call is when you go, my pen here. Okay, an example of a function call is when you call printf. We'll just do the simplest form of a function call, and you pass it an argument, and it ends in a semicolon. So that's why it's a statement, and it ends in a semicolon. So this right here, all function calls are going to have the name of the function and parentheses and a semicolon. A function definition, just like the main function, is going to have a return type, parentheses, and an opening curly brace, and a closing curly brace. So just like that's a block of code. That's a block of code. And this is a function call, which is a statement. And a function prototype is a statement that describes what the function returns and what kind of inputs go into the function in order for it to work. So printf right here, the kind of inputs that go into printf include a string. I'm not going to give an example of a function prototype because we're going to wait to deal with function prototypes when we create user-defined functions. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the difference between library functions and user-defined functions. Library functions, like I said before, are functions that have been created, that are already created and are used uh, over and over again, and you just have to include the library in your program. So right now we are doing pound include stdio.h, our standard input output library, and we have been using printf and scanf. And there are a whole bunch of libraries out there. For this class, we will not be using many of them, but there are a lot of libraries out there. Now, user-defined functions are made by the user to break up your program into sub-programs. So if you wanted to do something that you were going to reuse over and over again, you would put it into a function, make a function definition of it, which is a block of code, and you would put all of the implementation in that block of code. And then you could use that function over and over again, or invoke that function by making a function call to it. And that's a statement. So you would just make one statement and invoke that function. So say, for example, your function was 50 lines of code doing this huge calculation, but it had different inputs and outputs depending on, different data, but it's doing the same calculation that still takes a bunch of lines of code. You could just invoke it over and over again with different inputs. So the function definition takes certain inputs, and then from those inputs, it does its calculation. And then after the calculation is done, it will produce an output. So that's what a function definition does, and we do it in language C by making blocks of code, and those blocks of code have are set up just like the main function, which we've already been doing. And there will be another video with more detail on function definitions. The function call is one single statement that ends in a semicolon in which you invoke or use the function, and a function prototype is just a statement that describes the function. So that's just a descriptive statement that describes what the data types of the inputs are and what the function is going to return. So the output of the function is what it's going to return, and what goes into the function are the inputs. So in the next video, I'm going to talk more about library functions, and following that, I will have a video more about user-defined functions.